Welcome everyone to Elumind Expert Series podcast. Today I have the pleasure of having Dr. Vietta Sue Wilson with us. She is a good friend of mine and also a peak performance specialist and expert in the field. She has over 40 years of experience in this field, and she has done work with professional athletes in NFL, NHL. She's worked with very high-level tennis players, and also she's graced us with her knowledge and expertise in the field of biofeedback for many years. Dr. Wilson, Sue, so nice to have you here, and I want to really get started by maybe just having an introduction for our viewers in terms of how you got started in this field.
Probably because I have a little of the ADD, the inability to sit still. I've always been active. I'm physically active from the time I probably was a very young child. So I love to play. I love to move. And so I participated in sport when it became eligible for women to participate in sport, which it didn't initially, but I played in a small village where kids play. When I went to university then, in high school and stuff, I was a multi-sport athlete in a lot of different team sports. I trained in both kinesiology and psychology. I coached. I even officiated for a while. I liked the atmosphere of the challenge of sport and just the joy of working with teams and teammates. And I was able to pursue that throughout my academic career as an undergraduate. I went into my master's and did counseling and kinesiology. I taught for 3 years in a community college and coached. I still played sports with the older people on the side. Sport is my mental health. That's part of it. The other part is it's just so much fun. When you're working with people and you're working towards things, you really can have a lot of fun, and I like to have fun. So I did that. At the end of my 3 years of teaching, I ran into Bruce Ogilvie because I was kind of alone out there thinking that the mind and body would be together. Most of sport at that time was physiologically oriented. We did heart rate and wanted to know about your muscle strength, but we never thought about the moods, the emotions, those types of psychological issues. And Bruce Ogilvie was really the grandfather of clinical sports psych. And I ran into Bruce, we became friends, and he became somewhat of a mentor and said, yes, we can do sports psychology. Now, his area was more of helping athletes who have serious mental issues. I became interested, went back on my doctoral program, and I crossed both psychology, but performance psychology as well, and learning psychology. I did take the counseling, those types of things, but we added in the performance from both the physiological kinese, but added in the performance from psychology. And so my doctorate actually was on stress management as it affects tennis performance. And then I got out, got a job, and have been playing for 40 years since then with mind and body of people who are trying to improve or perform. Doesn't matter whether you're an athlete, an executive, a person, we're fine-tuning to try and help you improve your performance. But as you know, you have to also be careful that it doesn't cross over and impede your health.
Now, you're originally from North Dakota.
No, that's Jay. My brother Jay.
That was on purpose. No. That was on purpose. I was trying to get you.
You did.
So tell us, your neighboring state with
my
Jay.
Neighboring state of Jay Gunkelman and Jay. I know Montana's lost a lot of football games recently, but Montanans rule. I grew up in Montana, right off Yellowstone Park, in a very small village of 300 people. We had a whole 40-some in high school. And so we had to play together. If we wanted to play together, or whether it was music, whatever, we got to participate. Everybody got to participate in everything. And so from that point of view, it was wonderful. It was restricted in what was available to us. As being in elementary and all the way through high school in that small village, women were not allowed to compete. I had to play with the boys in the village. because the boys could play basketball, but the girls couldn't. We could lift hay bales, rope cows, have children, but we were too mentally weak to participate in competition. Fortunately, I moved to a city, and there they had sport, and I actually got involved in both individual and team sports in the high school and then later through university and outside organizations.
And how did you end up in Canada?
When I finished my doctorate, I was very lucky. It was a year of the woman. They were looking for women everywhere, and I interviewed on pure research campuses where they wanted me to do my research on stress management. I interviewed where they wanted me to coach basketball. That was all. And I wanted to do both. And when I was a doctoral student, I worked in physiology lab because we didn't have sport psych labs in those times. And I was doing both cardiovascular strength training besides doing the psychology. And two of my colleagues were from the same university in Toronto and said, come, we'll put our physiology with your psychology and performance and create a lab where we can improve performance. And so I followed them into Toronto.
So not only you're a trailblazer for the field of peak performance, but for women as well, because, and I know a colleague of ours in Vancouver who has trained with you, and many women who have really looked up to this path that you have created for them and made it possible for them to thrive in a field that, I guess, athletic field, a lot of it in the past was dominated by male athletes, but now we are seeing a lot more attention and focus on women and their the athletic endeavors. How do you feel about being that person, the trailblazer? I know you're very humble and you're always like, oh, I don't take the credit.
How about the word old? I look back and people don't know. I actually brought the first Title IX lawsuit against the U.S. government because essentially, as a grad student, I was expected to teach more hours than the men, and I wasn't allowed to even apply for jobs in which I had an education and had coached and stuff. And we actually won that one, which was the basis for going forward. And I like that. I'm standing on somebody else's shoulder because, as you know, movements take a whole group of people to get there. And the progress has been really, really significant. I'm very pleased with that. But I also am aware that it's uneven. I mean, in my case, I wasn't legally even allowed to participate. Now I don't think we have as many. But if I went to certain countries, that still exists. So the equality issue, for whatever reason that we discriminate, isn't equal around the world, nor to specific groups. So we have a lot of work still to do, but it is so much better now. I mean, I work with women in every field, not just as athletes, but coaches. My first experience with the NFL, I didn't realize that they had women football coaches in U.S. football, which is wonderful. So we're making strides of equality across lots of things, but we're not there.
Spoke about basketball. One of my favorite coaches is Becky Hammond, and you know, she coached with Pops in San Antonio, and then she went on and she tried for many years to get into head coaching, and I think they have interviewed her. It's coming, but it's still the process is slow.
Well, I go back and I've had some wonderful basketball men that did well and went and played pro basketball, and they came out, they weren't even considered for jobs as coaches. And it was my interpretation that part of that is that at that time we didn't think blacks had either the experience or the education to be coaches. It took a long time to break that barrier. So I'm sure there are still barriers for different reasons, but we've made a lot of progress.
We need a woman president.
Yeah.
So let's talk about peak performance.
Okay.
You've been doing this for so many years. Your name is etched in the Hall of Fame of peak performance because everyone I talk to, they know about Dr. Wilson. They know about Sue and what she's done in this field. Tell us what that is. What is peak performance?
For me, and I work with all ages, well, I should say probably starting about 12 or 13 up. So I get people that are aspiring all the way to people who already are, say, Olympic champions and are trying to hang on. So I've had the full spectrum. For me, peak performance is being able to produce what you're capable of at that moment in time, because that varies depending on the season. We have periods of periodization of when we do things. So our performance may be here in the fall because we're strength loading, for example, and that's the best that we could do. So I went and competed at this time. It probably wouldn't be my best performance. So it's going to vary, but peak performance is having the ability, both physically and mentally, to produce what you're capable of at that time. And I think that's what most people think is peak performance. And I agree. I don't tend to think of it coming to peak. I think in terms of a level. Because if you think of peak, it's like you have to go to one point and you're only good at that time, and then you don't have to be good again. You win at Olympic level and you don't have to be good again. And the research doesn't bear out that everybody's their best at that time. And I found it's a lot more comforting for us when we're trying to do something, if we can get to a level, let's say the top 3 in whatever our league is, because we have bad days, you might be 3. Your really good day, you're 1. So you want to be at a level where hopefully you can be above your competition, but it's not going to just be a peak. It's in a range. And I find that is much more achievable, which then it makes it easier for me to be able to say, you really did well today. You may not have been your very, very best, but it's the best you could give us today, and it's still good enough. And what we're trying to do is, this is the level you started at. You got more experience, more coaching, more practice, more competition. You just keep bringing the level up. So it's excellent performance across time.
So would it be fair to say it's a baseline of an individual that we are raising?
Yes.
And then at some point, that baseline, in comparison to the baseline of other individuals competing, would be higher. That's when when they're winning the gold or whatever, the top 3 places or.
Yeah. And people seem to think it's always under the control of the athlete, and it isn't. Let's say I'm in the top 3. I may even be top number 1, and I got a little bitty cold and don't even know it on the day for my world championship, and so I come in second. But I really worked at my absolute peak. It's just that things could have happened, so I'm not quite where I was yesterday or the day before. We don't have control over everything. So the ideal is to get up there and everybody else is below you, so I can have a bad day and still beat you.
I mean, the culture of sports is very much, if you don't have gold, you're terrible, right? You're a nobody, right? But from what you're telling me, what you're telling our viewers is that anything can just derail someone placing in the top 3. It could be the weather, it could be a cold, could be, some family dynamic stuff in the background that nobody knows about.
I'm going to give you an example. Had a world champion, went to the Olympics, expected to medal in the top. And I usually talk about medaling. If you're good enough, you hopefully even on a bad day will be in the top 3. And he was going to propose to a member of the team, wanted to marry her. And he decided instead of waiting until after the ceremony, he was going to hopefully win his medal and then propose. And they're the last training day, and she comes up and breaks up with him. I mean, who would have planned that? Needless to say, he didn't medal. He was devastated because he had this great scenario and he was in love with her and stuff. How would you know? I mean, we didn't know. So things happen. You can't control everything. We've had athletes on their way to a competition where a parent has died. And one parent was in an automobile accident, serious. And the person's going for a gold medal. I mean, you just don't know. And we don't know the variation all the time of the physiology. there are times when we didn't know that there might be air pollution and one person was sensitive to that particular place and they hadn't before, and it would affect their physiological capabilities. You don't know. So ideally, I think, again, if we can think of it, and we're into now talking about, as opposed to you're a bum if you don't win, we need to, again, reestablish what it really means. And the reality is we're not perfect, and we need to have more self-compassion. What is our job? Do the best that we can. If you were in charge of winning, you wouldn't even have to show up. Just go sign your name. I'm the winner. But life isn't that easy, and athletes have been fed a little bit of a silly pill that if you really are good, you're always going to win. And there are people who happen to be maybe special animals and win more than other people, or have the gift where they can have 3 bad days and still be better than you and I. So, but they're pretty special. They can win across time because they're just a more superior person.
So I guess with that, injuries and age can really derail someone's psychological well-being when they no longer can perform at the expected level.
Yeah.
And how do you address something like that? How do you address this? Because you see this, athletes have concussions or they have injuries and they're out.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult for them.
It's difficult, but we're much more knowledgeable as coaches and sports psych. We prepare for that. We try and prepare for all of those things. And there's a pretty good body of knowledge now of how to help people to prepare for injuries. And particularly if it's serious injury, you'll be out for like a year. And so it actually is a good opportunity while you're doing your physical retraining. You get more time to do your psychological retraining. So we don't waste time in the sense of sit around and drink beer and eat cookies. There are other trainings that they can do. The same thing with concussion now, that there's so many of those that you can use it as an opportunity to train something out. We do have more knowledge of what we can be doing, and there are specific protocols for like injuries. Just as an example, a colleague of mine did mental rehearsal on recovery from knee injuries. And during the recovery period, they're doing psychological imagery of how to heal, blood flow, muscles, etc., as well as imagery of their sport. And the research showed that they improve more quickly in their physiological, and when they come back, they're not as far behind because they've indirectly been doing their sport. And the knowledge base is getting better on what we do need to do, but you're right, it derails you. And so if you're not prepared for it and you quit, you're in trouble. So I think most sports psychology and coaches now try and prepare you for unexpected events.
Tell us a little bit about how you train athletes or executives in peak performance. What does the training entail?
For me, coming from a database, I like data. It's nice to know you play tennis well, but I want to know how many first serves you get in. And the same thing with control of the mind and body. We now have the equipment that we can look at almost every system of the body and the brain, and we have ideas of what is good, what is bad, where do you perform well. We can measure those kinds of things. So my first thing is I assess everybody. And I want to know from the bottom up, from the body, how is it affecting the mind, and then from the mind down. You can assess all of those. And we have some literature, not essentially as much as we'd like, but we have ideas of what it's associated with. Excuse me. For example, heart rate has been measured for decades and decades. As people get more fit, their heart rate goes down, and we use that as a measurement not only against a database, but against your own data. And we can do that in biofeedback with things like blood flow. And I use blood flow as an example. At night, you need good blood flow to clean out the body. Well, if you're shutting down unknowingly your blood flow to the body, you're probably not going to get cleaned out as much during the evening. And so you're not going to have the same capability the next day in terms of muscle contraction, those kinds of things. That would be an example. People that really shut down their blood flow, using blood flow as an example, are the ones that oftentimes will pop up with migraine headaches. And in the clinical world, I personally learned biofeedback through temperature because I had uncontrolled migraines and was hospitalized and nobody knew what to do, and talk therapy didn't work. And biofeedback had started in the 1970s. And I started doing temperature biofeedback, learned to control it, and I still get migraines, but I can shut them down in 5 minutes, and I'm not taking a medication or been sick for
In 5 minutes.
5 minutes. I was in the middle of a tour in Greece and got a migraine. Sun sets me off at certain stage, and I went over and sat in the corner, and 5 minutes later, I'm ready to go. But it's skill training. So that's an example of a system, but we could use other systems. People are not aware that they're tightening their muscles. An athlete gets anxious, they tighten their muscles, and I was working with the sprinters at the time, and we had world caliber sprinters, and Charlie Francis, the coach, said to me, "Sue, I want you to work on their muscle tension," and they look fine. But I put the equipment on them, and it's slightly elevated. And Charlie's saying, "Sue, they can't run fast unless you relax their shoulders." We didn't have a lot of research on that, but I've learned that coaches, through trial and error and talking to each other, learn some smart things. And I'm looking at him because I never learned in anatomy that there was a connection between the shoulders and the legs. I did it anyway. And lo and behold, you watch the 100-meter runners, and the winner has to be relaxed in the last 20 meters. And about 5 years after Charlie passed, there's a research showing a neural connection between shoulders and legs. Well, the whole body's a neural connection. So muscles from the bottom up not only affect my muscles, but they can affect my mind as well. So there are two modalities. We look at the sweat response because it's an oldest measurement of psychophysiology is the electrodermal galvanic skin response, and that it's associated with emotion. You'll learn, though, that not everybody talks in the same modality. Some people have sweaty hands when they're nervous, other people don't. So that's why I use multiple measures, because you invariably talk in one of them. And if you've learned, like I've got a number of athletes who are highly trained because you have to be in a precision sport. So you learn to control your emotions. You learn to control your emotions with your partners. You learn to control your emotions in your work. And you may not sweat at all because you've learned how not to. Mm-hmm. And so I put you under stress, and if I only measured that, I'm not going to see anything. But I might find that you have cold hands because you forgot to control the stress in your hands. Or unbeknownst to you, you start wrinkling your face and your muscles, which are associated with anxiety, etc. I can measure it in your face. So if we use multiple measures, we can find out what system you actually talk to us in. And if it's important for performance, you can learn the skill of how to change it. Like the shoulders, they very quickly learn how to drop their shoulders by putting equipment on. You're at 10 microvolts. Now I want you to run. I put a little beeper on. And so if their shoulders start sneaking up when they're running, up to 10 microvolts, it'd go beep, beep, and they would let go, because the problem was without the feedback, they didn't know their shoulders were up there. It takes some of them a long time to learn. So the equipment speeded up the learning. Good sprinters learn, but it's easier with the equipment.
Well, I've seen Usain Bolt run to the finish line, and it's almost like he's posing for a picture as he's running to the finish line. He's so relaxed. I mean,
yeah.
He's a phenomenon, obviously.
Yeah, he's a
and he's 6'5" giant, so he's got long stride. But I can
let me give you one. If you looked at a lot of the Canadian, little bias here, sprinters, they have learned to relax. You look at Andre DeGrasse, who is shorter. He's not the world animal like you're saying. I mean, he's shorter, which gives him a bit of a disadvantage. He doesn't have the leg length. You watch his last 20 meters, he is relaxation in motion. And the winners, usually, you'll see them in those last 20 meters, they just relax and go. If they tighten, they're going to slow the foot speed, arm movements, and that small difference is the difference between winning and losing.
It's incredible. So you mentioned heart rate, and we talk about heart rate variability. What is that heart rate variability? Just for the viewers so that they understand.
Okay. We've always measured how fast your heart beats, number of beats per minute. And then science got a lot more specific and looked at something called the time in between heartbeats. And you would think initially that if you beat regularly, that meant you were healthier and that you were performing better. And what they found out was actually the opposite, that if you have irregularity, so I beat 1 second and then half a second or 2 seconds, you have more flexibility or variability, and that is associated with better health, better heart health. And it turns out learning to do that also affects more of the systems in the body as well as the brain. So now they use heart rate variability. We try and improve the flexibility. Think of it this way. If I'm a gymnast, I have to have great flexibility to do all of the various moves that I have to do. And if I'm not flexible, I don't have as much of a range of motion. So I want the flexibility to be able to do more things. Well, it turns out the heart works the same way. If I have more variability between beats, I actually have a better functioning heart, and it talks better to my brain if I have heart rate variability. And so it's one of the major treatments now, if I can say that, medically, it's being used and researched, as well as performance. The data is quite clear on improving variability heart rate for athletes improves their physiological training, like their endurance, those types of things. There are some preliminary, but very preliminary data that it may also improve your actual physical sport performance beyond fitness, but the data is not totally clear on that yet.
So I guess we could use HRV for CEOs as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it sounds like it's this variability is important for overall health.
Exactly.
And executives, they have many stressors, and their heart is under so much stress on a continuous basis.
Right now, I've been told, and the research is suggesting that heart rate variability, good heart rate variability, is the best marker for health for everybody, not just athletes. So it can be used not only to find out where you are now, but it could be trained to improve your health. And if we look at executives or surgeons or anybody that's in a job, you're performers. And you need the basic health, so we could do basic health, but we also should be able to improve your performance regardless of what your job is.
Now, you've talked about transfer skills. I've heard that term from you many times, and I really like the idea of being able to use a skill at the point where we need to apply it at the peak level, or at the level that you were describing, the baseline to be elevated to peak level.
Yeah.
Tell us what transfer skills are.
Okay. For me, one of the areas that initially did not get researched well and was not taught well is we would train anyone well, first we have to assess them. We really need to know what it is that the person has, and we need to know what they need. Sport does that probably better than almost anything else. But if you looked at executive training, they can tell you what you need to be in marketing, etc. Or a surgeon needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So we have to assess what we need, what the person has, and then we have to train them. That's where the early models stop. So if we were training athletes, for example, on being relaxed or more comfortable or more aggressive, depending on what they needed for their sport, we did it in practice, and we tell them to go do it out in the field. But we didn't teach them how to strengthen themselves to be able to do it in the field. And sport probably does it better than business or the others. So what I started doing is, the literature's clear. If you don't practice, nothing works. You've got to have enough experience, and you, being a father, know if they don't brush their teeth enough time, they're not going to learn how to do it. And they have to do it over and over again until it becomes a habit. And we now have some literature saying that it takes about 60 days for a lot of things to transfer. Well, we would teach it, and then we go away. And so the only time the athlete uses it is maybe when they're out in competition. So they aren't as competent as they could be. And if you aren't feeling competent, you don't be confident. So my way of doing it is that if you're learning to serve, you have to do umpteen million serves till it becomes automatic. We need to take that skill, let's say, of relaxing your shoulders. I need to have it grilled in to the point where it becomes automatic. And that means trials, 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 quality trials. So what I've done is that if it's shoulders, I've created little drills. So you can do it while you're in your car. I actually trained a woman athlete because she had children. She was a lawyer. We trained in the subway. So she practiced all of her skills in the subway. We didn't have equipment, but we've tried it with the equipment. She learned what it was like, say, to relax her shoulders, and she would practice in the subway, because we have to get to the point where it becomes automatic. Don't think, just do it. And we can do that for all of the skills. So my transfer skills are assess, train you with equipment, have you feel what it's like, and now go practice in your real life. And then, of course, with athletes, the next thing is we have to practice under the stress of competition. And we can create phony competitions, but nothing succeeds like going to a competition and learning how to compete. That's a different sport than practice. And sometimes our athletes don't do well because we can't get them to enough competitions that they learn to compete. They go and they expect to win on day one, and sometimes they don't know how to compete. Well, compare your job. Did you get an opportunity to learn the skills and then practice under competition and then keep improving under competition? We don't do that as well, but that's the purpose of a transfer skill. Got to practice.
Oh, it reminds me of my coaching days when I was coaching soccer. So you're standing there and you see the other coach yelling and screaming at these kids during a match, which is not going anywhere because the kids don't have the skills practiced during the practice time. So yelling at them is not going to make them learn the skills on the field. Practice is super important in every field that we have. But I think it's the question of how the transfer skills can elevate performance if they have been practiced at the peak level. And you use many tools. One of them, I suppose, is HRV, but also you talked about skin salts content or conductance, and as well as temperature and muscle.
We'd like to be able to do it with brain biofeedback or electroencephalography. Our problem is the only place I've ever been able to use it is in a sport where they're like standing still for a period of time, because the equipment still isn't good enough to be able to get it when they're moving. I think that's probably NASA quality equipment. Some point that's going to happen, so we actually can see what your brain is doing when you're on the field. But for me right now, it's still just not doable. The equipment doesn't do a good job of that, but it's coming.
Speaking of which, talk about some of the research stuff. What is happening in the field of biofeedback? What's happening in the field of peak performance or EEG biofeedback that you're aware of, that you're involved in?
I think probably the most important thing is now we're getting wearables. And so the data, I'll give you an example. When I was a master's student, we had to wait till there was a medical person in the building for us to be able to take blood pressure in the physiology lab. Can you imagine today? You can go anywhere, you can look at my watch and get blood pressure. It was a medical field. We're now getting enough knowledge to know more what is it traditional, what it can be used for. People are getting educated. So we're getting the equipment to be able to measure these things. We haven't totally educated everyone, but if you look at athletes, they're much more sophisticated than I am about heart rate variability is going to affect me by X, Y, and Z, because the research is now there. And like your blood pressure, if I check my blood pressure and it's high blood pressure, I can learn skills to take it down. Or in my case, I learn skills to take my blood pressure up and I don't need medication. So from the medical point of view, we can transfer the assessment and the skill knowledge to give it to the everyday person. So hopefully it becomes not only healthier, but more cost effective. And we do that in sport now. We used, for example, a golfer. His heart rate would skyrocket and his putting wasn't very good at that point. And we practiced and we took it to a competition and had it on him so he would know when his heart rate went up to step back, do his breathing, his cue words and stuff. He got whistled by an official that it was illegal in that particular tournament. So that went out the door. But now, I don't know if it's going to be illegal in other sports. You actually can monitor during practice or during competition. And if we take measurements across time, we'll really get a pattern of the performance. Whether it's our health system or sport, this one shot get data just is not as reliable as getting a pattern so we can see what's really happening. Technology is making that possible. I mean, I go to the gym now where the elite aspiring young kids, and they're checking their heart rate and their blood pressure and everything else, and they have markers. Where am I today? And that is getting more and more available, which is just going to transform. It already has transformed how people train. I mean, how many steps you take a day and that kind of thing, even for the public. With what I see coming, which is less expensive, more accurate, including hopefully eventually EEG of the brain, people are going to be given a little caution of, you're getting a little anxious now, and it's easier for me to calm down when I'm not over the peak, and I can have control then. And control leads to competence, which leads to confidence, and for performance, that's critical.
We've come a long way
Yes,
in
we have.
technology. I mean, I remember as a kid, my dad got me a Casio watch. And, you know, it was the first time I've ever seen a digital watch. And to me, I was like, wow, you know, I'm getting the world. But now, you know, you measure your heart rhythms, or you look at your heart rhythms, and you can
I got
visit the
AFib right
doctor.
now.
Yeah. It's quite intense how far we've come. Now, what is the limitation of technology in what you do? And where does the human factor come in?
Okay.
Where technology can assist, but is not really what we're looking for?
I think there are a couple issues that I see. One of them is that when we have all the data, regardless of whether we're a track athlete, whether you're an executive, we get the data and we get arrogant. And we think we know everything. And so we're hanging on one number or three numbers, and we think we know everything, and we really don't. You could take, say, your heart rate or your heart rate variability, and it's running normal, but you feel miserable, and you're thinking, well, my heart rate variability is good, and you haven't got enough knowledge to know that maybe you should go to the doctor because it's another system, or it's affecting your heart, but not your heart rate variability. So one of the limitations I see in the future is everybody's so used to data, we get arrogant and think we know about the whole body. And you, of all people, know you can study for many, many years and decades and still not know a lot. So I think our arrogance is going to get some of us in trouble in terms of it. It also, from the point of view of the psychology of, well, your heart rate looks good. So me, the coach, is saying, I don't care if you're tired, get your butt out there and run. Again, because we don't know everything, we ascribe to it. There's another issue and I've had this with corporations where I'll go in and we treat an executive or a surgeon just as athletes, and we assess them, and then we give them training with the equipment and the transfer skills. Where does that data go? Do I go back and tell the corporation you've got 2 people there who aren't going to make it? That one's a basket case, whatever the case may be. So it could be misused. Yeah. So the data has to be carefully controlled from my point of view, so it isn't misused. Athletes have been kicked out of sport because some coach along the line has taken how far they jump, how high they jump, how fast they run, and said, you didn't make it, out you go. And they may have kicked a Wayne Gretzky out because they didn't fit the standard model. Sometimes we don't realize that there are people who are outside of our modeling that shouldn't be eliminated just because they don't fit our parameters. So it can be misused. And I think that's one of the issues that we're going to see more of in the future.
I know you're my friend. I know where your heart is with kid athletes.
Yeah.
And I know so many kids don't have the opportunity. Yeah. They could be elite in anything, not just sports, but in anything.
Exactly.
But they miss out on the opportunity because there are not enough resources to help them. What are some of your thoughts on how to, as a society, I mean, you're a pioneer in this field, what can we do as a society to be better at this?
Okay. I want to use a case example, and I think I have permission to do that. Isabella is a tennis player that I've worked with for 8 or 9 years, and she had intractable, life-threatening seizures. And because of the resources of her family, not just that they spent the money doing it, but they had the education and the motivation and the skill to be able to give her neurofeedback at home. She's an absolutely marvelous example of when we have the technology and the understanding and we can apply it. She's had over 500 neurofeedback sessions because it was done at home. And she's a ranked player in the NCAA tennis system. She's an example of resources being used. Now, here's where it could be extended. Her mother tested their other 2 children who are younger and found one of them showing pre-epilepsy waves. And because she saw it early, she was able to do the neurofeedback and control those. And so the young man is now through teenage years and university and doing well without seizures because they're in a position to have resources. This young man didn't face what Isabel went through. If we took our resources, and it's coming with the technology, and we put it down in our younger children, where first grade, second grade, and this would be up to experts to tell us where, we could do a quick assessment and find out if they have a tendency towards a learning disability, which we have lots of programs for. If they have some physiological condition, we could find it early. And I think it would end up being cost and benefit. But right now, it's only the people who are in the luxury of being able to either education or finances be able to get the resources, not only for your kid to be healthy, but have a chance to participate in sport or music or whatever it is that they would like to do.
You know, one of the things that I face as a challenge is education about what's available as a resource. Oftentimes, families don't know that they have biofeedback for the body, neurofeedback for the brain, all these wonderful technologies that are out there. Now, not all of them are affordable or covered through Medicare, but they are out there. And I think part of the education would be to also look at resources that can, what I'm talking about is economic resources that can make these services available to the general public. I think you and I know it's a tough path.
Yeah, I think we have to go to the educational system, though. It is a universal. Every kid pretty well goes to school. It seems like a natural place to put it, and it's a natural place for the kids in sport or music or dance or something that they like. They will be able to incorporate it because they're motivated. But we could do the assessment, and it's like, as a kid, I got beat up a little bit falling down and stuff, and I would get a little scrape or a cut on my knee. Well, you didn't go to the doctor. Your mother cleaned it out and put a Band-Aid on it. If you get it early enough, and we do that in the elementary levels, we can do what I'd call the Band-Aid and teach them, one, to quit falling down, but two, have a bunch of Band-Aids, which I see the biofeedback, neurofeedback is like the Band-Aid. We don't have to go to the doctor and have surgery. We need to stop it from getting infected. We need to be able to help them so the anxiety doesn't take hold, or they get depressed, or they are competent enough that I can go to choir and make the cut singing in the choir, which then my mental health is better, I'm happier, and I'll make a better citizen.
The amount of money we spend in Canada on acute care is absolutely crazy. Something like $1,500 to $2,000 for a psychiatric admission to the hospital, and most people go in for 2 weeks, and that's crazy money, like $28,000. And I always think to myself, what can we do with this money at grassroots level, right? Go to these schools, find the kids that starting to show some signs of difficulty.
Yeah.
And invest that money there, right? And it sounds like something that we have to be working on.
And the easiest way to introduce it is to find something that the kids like. Yeah. And this is one of the values of sport or any type of thing like music, art, is they're so motivated that they're willing to try things. And so I think that's the entrance way to get in. If we can't make it mandatory, it just to me is a no-brainer that our society should be investing in our kids. And we talk about it, but we're not really doing it. If we were, we would have assessment, we would have training, we would have more resources available for them for both physical and mental health. I mean, we're looking at a tsunami of problems based on COVID. And I keep hearing from my colleagues in the U.S., the number one request in universities right now is mental health. And that includes the athletes, that they aren't doing as well as they used to. But if we can do it when they were younger, it's like learning to ride the bike. It's an age where you learn it more easily and you're motivated to do it, and it can stay with you for life.
It's better now, I suppose, in athletes. But, there's also the stigma associated with, if I'm not mentally doing well, I'm going to get cut from the team, or, I don't get that next contract, or, and I think it's gotten better. We've seen some pro athletes, coming and describing their mental health issues, but it's still, I think we have long ways to go to get them the help they need.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's part of understanding that you don't have to be a cookie cutter person to be of value to the team. You don't have to be number one. It's part of that self-compassion and understanding of each other that as fast as I can run, I will never be a runner. But it's okay for me to be on the track team and carry somebody else's shoes. It doesn't diminish me as a person.
Well, Sue, I have to say it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I've learned so much from you, and I think the viewers have also
Thank you.
Seen so much of your expertise delivered with such grace and compassion. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to reach out to our viewers.
Thank you. My pleasure in that I've had so much fun learning more of the brain stuff that you do and where we're going, that it's just been fun.